Oh hi, Dave Rome here. If you're hearing this, then you're on the free feed of the Escape Collective podcast network. We're happy you're here, and we'll continue to give plenty of expert opinion and analysis away for free. But really, our best stuff is saved for members of Escape Collective. After all, with no advertising or affiliate links, it's our members who make this all possible. From in-depth interviews with leading experts, to class-leading reviews, through to unique things like my threaded series for anyone spinning spanners of any level. That's the sort of content you'll get by becoming a member. And as an added bonus, you won't have to listen to ads like this again. Head to escapecollective.com/join to sign up.
Welcome to Geek Warning, the podcast that puts the world's most interesting cycling tech and more into one place. I'm Suvi and I am joined this week by the full tech crew again. We have Dave Rome.
Hello.
Alex Hunt.
Hello.
The two of you have been extremely busy doing galleries of pro bikes, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. We also have Ronan McLaughlin here.
Hi, Suvi.
And Ronan has been busy changing tyres, I've seen on social media.
Mounting tires, and that was that was about half of. I'm sorry for being pedantic. It was just there were new wheels and new tires, and that was about half of what I had to get through.
How many of the same wheel did you get?
4 sets.
Four sets of wheels.
8 wheels,
and each with a different type of tire.
Each with a different size of tire.
Ah,
same type, different size.
Oh, that's a good tease. All right.
The tease of what is to come, I guess.
Yeah, it feels weird teasing it because I've been thinking about it for like 6 months. It's been occupying my brain.
Right. Well, something is to come. Speaking of, people changing tires, Brad has been probably busy doing that as well. Brad Copeland is going to join the pod later on, as usual, to answer some of your Ask a Wrench questions with Dave. And we also have some tech and new products and industry news to talk about. So we're going to get straight into the show. Dave, I believe we're going to get right into where you have been for the last week or so. I believe you're home now, but you were at TDU.
Yes. I've been in Adelaide for, Tour Down Under. It's the start of the WorldTour season, and I spent the past week there, and you got home yesterday. The race is still going, but I ran out of energy. And I was there for the women's race and part of the men's race, and I photographed all the bikes that were there. Took some 2,000 photos, have edited some 600 photos, tech photos, and lots of bikes.
That is a lot of bikes. I was about to ask how many hundred of pictures you took, but that was thousands, not just hundreds.
Yes, too many.
Yeah.
But turns out there's a lot of bikes there, and we've seen them all.
Mm-hmm. And it's probably then obvious that pro bikes have been on our minds this week. At least Dave and Alex, you've been busy, like I said, putting those calories up on the site. So we're going to talk about who are the winners and losers of the 2025 World Tour Pelotons.
It's not subjective at all.
In terms of, no, not at all. I mean, we're deciding here who's going to win and who's going to lose, just purely based on how the bikes look.
Yep, exactly.
That's what really matters at the end of the day anyway, so.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. Well, who's going to go first? I think my question would be to Dave. Given that you've taken 2,000 photos of bikes, what is the bike, if I asked you, like, what bike stands out? What comes to your mind when I ask what's the best looking bike? One bike.
It's a boring pick, but it's just kind of, for me, it popped the most in photos, and I kind of, there's something about the way they've done the paint that I find is pretty cool. But I mean, there's two, and both are from the same brand, which kind of makes the pick a little bit boring and generic. But the Bora Hansgrohe Red Bull bike is one. Like the white really pops, and with the Red Bull kind of logos coming off the head tube with that sort of like sticker slap, kind of skateboardy inspired decals beneath the paint, I quite liked. I think that bike looks really good. And then the FDJ Suez bike on the women's side of things, I think is absolutely lovely. Both tarmac SL8s and both not aero bikes. Sorry, Ronan.
I'd definitely say with the Red Bull tarmac, it's definitely one you've got to go and take a look at the gallery to really appreciate. I think if you just look at the bike on the TV or from afar, you don't get to see everything that bike's about, because a lot of the branding is actually white on white, like you say, sticker effect at least. So yeah, actually heading over to Escape and looking at that gallery. Yeah, it's a really lovely bike, but some of the most subtle branding in the World Tour, I'd say.
Yeah. And then making that bike even more interesting is like Sam Welsford, I photographed the bike on maybe 4 days before the race, and then by the race day, I'd noticed that he had swapped out the front derailleur for a big 1x aero chainring for the first sprint stage. So, I mean, there's just, some interesting tech going on there where they seem to be chopping and changing more than other teams are. So, yeah, I think there's some cool tech going on there, but yeah, it is also yet another SL8, and there are many of those in the World Tour. So
it's quite a few, yeah.
You mentioned chopping and changing there, Dave. I mean, I think that's an indication of this team's attention to detail, and I think it's evidence of other teams' lackadaisical or lackluster or lazy, dare I say, approach to performance. Because there are other teams who could make such shifts, and if it's a watt, if it's 10 watts, I can't say what it is for Sam Welsford. At sprinting speeds, it could be a lot, and there's also like chain retention gains, and there's all sorts of things going on there. Other teams not doing it in this day and age, it still strikes me as incredible.
I feel like you'd still probably only do it if you're sponsored by SRAM. Like on Shimano, you don't really have that big aero ring, that nice integrated power meter, spider ring that's all enclosed like SRAM offer. You perhaps don't have the same wide range cassette.
If you're sponsored by Shimano, fair enough, you can't do that. But most of the teams buy their Shimano, and so they're free to do what they want. Well, I assume they're free to do what. Maybe they get a discounted rate based on certain terms and conditions.
I still think if you're on Shimano, it's not an easy swap. Maybe one day if you could potentially put like a GRX derailleur on there, but I don't think teams are going to do that. So I think really SRAM allows it at the moment, and SRAM allows it cleanly and without them having to disassemble the whole bike. Like realistically, they're just kind of swapping the crank, and the shifters and everything else remain, and the front derailleur is quick to put back on because they've got a special tool that replicates the position. So I think for a SRAM sponsor team, it's easy enough. But yeah, I mean, you look at other SRAM sponsor teams, you also don't see them doing it either. So I think it is indicative that they've come to this race and they mean business, and perhaps it's also a sign of how dominant Sam is at the moment, that maybe they know that they can optimize for the wins because he is the favorite to take the wins. Whereas there's a lot of other teams here that are kind of just here to get some summer miles in, where back home it's miserable. So it's, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but yeah, I definitely am not seeing as many other teams going to quite the effort here.
Interesting. Well, Ronan, what's your top pick? I assume you come from a different.
Well, I mean, you guys have started us down the wrong path, so I'll just follow you guys. If we're talking about like the looks in that, I just did love the Jayco Lula. Love is just something special, I think, with the chrome, and I always like something about chrome bikes. So yeah, that would be, I think we're talking looks here rather than pure performance.
Are they the same? But also, Ronan, your pick there. It's worth noting that they actually haven't changed the graphic design at all from last year. They're carrying it over, but what they have changed is it's new. It's shinier than before. It's like noticeably. Last year it was like a beautiful bike, but it was a little bit dull in the finish. And now it's actually got like almost like a mirrored metallic look to it, which is beautiful. So the word that I got was that they've basically now done the paint the way it should have been. So take for that as you will.
What do you think about the fact that there are a few teams that are bringing over the previous year's design? What do you think about that? Like, say, Little Trek.
I think we're
just keeping it.
I honestly believe I've been thinking about this and how to write it, because it's going to basically be the introduction to my men's World Tour gallery. But basically, I think we're coming to a point where the season officially starts for the Tour de France. And I think an increasing number of teams have realized that is the best opportunity to get the most noise and most attention with their branding, and they're doing the kit changes and the bike changes and everything, all the new bikes at the Tour de France. And so I think it's not like that they're carrying it over. I think just the start of the official crossover season, I guess, has changed in the last year or two. And I think we first saw that with the Jayco team, where they used to get new sponsors on board for the tour, and it would be a big song and dance. I think we also saw it with EF and Rafa. Rafa used to do special release kits for them at tour. But I now see a lot of teams coming to the Tour Down Under on brand new bikes. They're fresh, but they're graphically the same as before.
Am I right in thinking Red Bull did that last year? Their official kit announcement was just ahead of a tour.
Yes, yeah. The bike you and I have picked as the nicest bike of the new year actually has been out for 6 months. So, yep, you're completely right.
Right. Alex, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, I mean...
What is yours?
Mine is definitely not... I think it's a safe bet to say it's not the fastest bike in the Peloton. But it's also probably the most classic looking of what's about, and with a return to, an Italian group set as well. I think it's just a lovely bike to look at, which is Cofidis's Look 795.
I see what you did there. I see what you did.
I just think it's a really nice looking bike. I think it's everything Ronan probably doesn't want to see in a modern race bike. There is very little in the way of modern aero optimization. But it's just a beautiful looking bike in my opinion.
I don't think it's the worst in that regard. It's got, I think there's some nice details there, and I actually quite like the fact that the Look bikes still run a two-piece cockpit, but it's actually probably the most aero of the two-piece cockpits in its design, but it allows for, customization of handlebar separate to the stem and adjustment of the handlebar angle. I think there's some really clever details in that bike.
You mean more aerodynamic than the current Ridley cockpit used by Uno X?
Oh, please save this, because this goes into my losers. I'm saving that for my biggest losers.
That is 100% temporary. That was officially that, or unofficially, that was just because the one-piece cockpits were not available at the time that the riders had to leave for Australia. So when they get back to Europe, they are all getting fitted with one-piece cockpits.
Except, and all the riders, Dave, the riders who are in Europe on the men's team at the training camps with the one-piece setups still have the integrated aero things sitting way up above this dropped headset, which I said at the time was dumb and has now been proven to be dumb.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not defending that. That is dumb. And that is something that I actually asked John Pitman, who's the head of aerodynamics of South Australian Institute of Sport. I asked him while we're walking around the pits whether that would be aero or not, and anyway, we'll have that question answered in a separate podcast very, very soon, perhaps in the next few days. But yes, Ronan, you are not alone in the thinking that is dumb to integrate the handlebar and stem into the top tube and then place the handlebar and stem well above the top tube.
At the time this bike emerged, and I think we're let's just roll with this being my loser of the year, because at the time that was unveiled, or at the time that bike was spotted at an OX training camp, I always question myself, okay, maybe this isn't suitable for the average consumer who maybe can't get into that super low aero position, but perhaps the pros can get down there, and they've made that specifically for the pros. And getting back to what I was talking about last week or the week before about bikes being pro only now, even though they are for sale. But then, you look at the shots coming out of the Uno X training camp. Every shot I've seen has had, a ton of spacers beneath the stem, raising the stem up to where it would be if you hadn't got a dropped tube.
Yeah, and that's perhaps an old school example that maybe once upon a time when the team DSs insisted all riders just slam their stem, maybe that applied, but now we actually are seeing headset spacers being a common theme on most pro bikes. So yeah. So before we go any further into the bikes we don't like, Suvi, what was the standout for you that you actually did like?
Well, I was excited to get into the bikes that I don't like, because as usual, my list of bikes that I didn't like.
All right, well, let's go that way then. Let's stick on. I have
one more bike I did like.
I've got bikes that I like as well, but surprisingly, to be honest, we titled this as winners and losers of the World Tour, and technically this team bike is in World Tour bike.
Okay.
I think the EF Education Oatly bike, I like the colors. I think all the colorful bikes, they're the ones that I like the most of the team bikes, even though they're not bikes that I would necessarily want to own, like as my own bike, but I just really like the pop of color, and it's just nice to be able to distinguish that this is this team as their team bike. Yep. But then I think Cannondale has done, EF Education, they've done it really well. Like, it's not over the top. the combination, it just works. Whereas then there's others who just go the decals and the wheels and everything. It's just too much clash going on.
Yeah, and it's surprising you say that, because there's a hell of a lot going on with those EF Education bikes. Like there are a lot of stickers and they're out there, but yeah, I mean it does somehow come together and it does look cool. What stood out?
It's like a coordinated mess.
Yeah, exactly. What stood out to me on that bike is that they're sponsored by Vision and have historically used Vision cockpits on the front, but all the bikes I saw are actually using Cannondale's own Momo handlebar, with which they've then added Vision stickers to the front of to keep the sponsors happy. But yeah, I thought that was cool because it actually keeps like a cohesive design through the front end of the bike. I think it looks nicer with that Momo handlebar.
Those Vision bars just never seem to fit all that well anytime I see them. They're lovely bars and all, but they're obviously not designed for any one frame, and they always look like they're not designed for.
Yeah, I think the one exception is maybe Merida comes to mind, which did design its frame around that Vision bar. But yeah, I mean that doesn't work aesthetically for other reasons. So
speaking of Vision bar, another the bike I was going to say that I thought the other good looking bike I thought was the X Lab from XDS.
Oh really? You liked it?
With Vision bars also. That was the segue I was trying to do there, but I totally botched it. So
that was one of the bikes that I thought is just no.
I mean, I'm not saying I really like it, nor do I know how much, like, did they do any one tunnel testing or any analysis on it or whatever, but there's nothing glaringly obviously bad about the aero bike that they presented, which, 6 months ago we heard XDS is coming into the World Tour. You're not expecting something as, visually on point as the X Lab aero bike is.
It just is inspired and borrows ideas from everyone else.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like the original thought in it is pretty limited, and it's clearly they've just looked at all the bikes in the market and gone, let's take that detail, we'll take that detail, we'll take that detail, and let's just manufacture it well.
But Dave, how often does that go wrong? How often do you see bikes where they just copy the best of everything else they've seen and then put it all together and it looks terrible? Whereas this still looks like it works, I think.
Yes. Yeah. So, for me, that bike, you can sort of look at every individual element and be like, oh, I think they borrowed it from X, or, I think they borrowed it from that Italian brand. But yeah, I mean, to bring all those features together and probably in quite a tight timeline, I mean, there's also, and hit a price point that they're hitting. I mean, I'm looking at them and having spoken to them at the show at the Tour Down Under, I think once they get distribution set up, I mean, the price points they're hitting and the bike they're offering, I think they will make waves. So, yeah.
My biggest fear with this XDS entry into the World Tour is that it's another excuse for every second headline for the entire year to be the cheapest bike in the World Tour, which actually factually wasn't correct about the Van Rysel last year. But anyway, moving on from that, I think this, like the Van Rysel that we've seen this time last year, not so much the aero bike, but the FCR, was it? Or the RCR? I can't remember the naming. But the XDS is it. If you put the two of them in front of me, based on looks, I'd be going for the XDS.
Interesting. I don't agree, but I find that very interesting. Yeah.
I'm just going to throw a third ball into this mix at the minute, because I think another bike that I've actually really enjoyed looking at recently, from your galleries, Dave, actually, is Intermarché's Cube. I think
that stood out to me. Yeah.
It's a nice looking bike. One of the things that really stood out, and you'll have to wait for the gallery to go up to see it, is just how thin the stem is. The integrated cockpit is very, very... it's not got much stack to it at all, which for me at least looks really nice. But I think the thing that actually stands out and that isn't given enough attention is that the SRAM Red build of that bike retails at the minute for £7,300.
Cheapest bike in the World Tour.
Which is considerably cheaper than the Van Rysel, which everyone is
cheapest bike in the World Tour.
So I think actually that bike is phenomenal value, but also it looks pretty good under the Intermarché red colours they've gone for this year.
Yeah.
It looks so similar to another brand's colours, though.
Which brand?
Or another team. Or other team. I think just with the Pinarello.
Of Ineos?
It's really similar. Yeah.
They're quite different when you see them up. Like, the Ineos is much more orange now. And it has like a fade, whereas like that Intermarché one, I'd say has... I don't know if my photos show it well, but it's more like a deep, like... it's a deep red, like a metallic kind of... sparkly red, almost like a gemstone kind of ruby red, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's something that does have to be seen is when you get up close and personal with it, the back end isn't black, it's like glittery red.
Yeah, it shows, it's not black, but it's just the fade is just similar.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. I actually had the same
it's not a bad thing at all.
No.
I'm not saying that. It's just that was my first
There's
thought.
a lot of subtleness in a lot of these paints in the World Tour. Movistar have a bike that looks like dead. It just looks so plain. And then you get into the sun and it actually has like a glitter within the paint, and it actually looks really like quite rich and deep with like this really dark navy that only comes to light in sort of direct sunshine. Very hard to photograph, but looks great. And I actually had the same issue with the Van Rysel with the AG2R. Is I initially thought it was their old bike. I thought it was just like black with green, and it wasn't until the mechanic pointed out in the sun that it actually is like it's now navy in the front end. But you can't really see it in my photos, and it's really hard to photograph. But it's like a glitter-based navy. A lot of glitter this year.
I think if we're talking just about paint, one of the bikes that really does pop is that of Cerazit, the Orbea, and they use like this iridescent kind of paint as contour lines across it.
Yeah,
which, especially in some light, that
thing popped.
A nice,
yeah.
Yeah.
If you could get that paint on a different bike, it might be good looking.
Yeah.
That's why I said if we're talking just about paint.
That bike, there is something about the angles that it does look a bit like it's been driven into it's been left on the roof rack and driven into the local McDonald's. It's kind of like it's a bit too square in its angles. There's something going on there.
Can we take a second just to apologize to anybody who owns one of these bikes that, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yes.
And so other people may entirely disagree with our takes, but I want to go back to the Cube for a second, Alex, because the Cube have always been phenomenal value for money, and that team has put them to good use over the last few years. So yeah, it's a bike. It's always been phenomenal value for money, but it's never a bike that's really appealed to me until I seen the paint job this year. But there's still something about the handlebar and stem I think that looks disjointed from the rest of it. It doesn't work for me the way it works for you.
Interesting note on them is like I would have a year ago when I saw the Newman wheels, which had that hidden valve that requires the valve adapter to inflate the tires, kind of thought that was a little bit gimmicky, but they're sticking with it. It seems like that is very much staying. So I guess that part surprised me. And yeah, I guess the other part that I didn't really expect is last year I think we were talking about that team as having potentially some prototype look power meter pedals that they may or may not have been using and that were really hard to pick and that we were looking out for them. And this year they're on Shimano pedals.
I think the power readings that those pedals give are very much a prototype.
Ouch.
Just one final note on power meters, actually. Something that did strike me is the Cerazit team are using a single-sided 4i.
Yeah.
They're not using the Pro version. They're just using the non-drive side crank arm.
Dave, you and I had a conversation the other day about just because pros do something doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is a common theme to remember, but yeah, I don't have an answer to that. I guess it is an interesting finding, and
it just seems interesting because an existing product from that brand does exist where it's dual-sided.
Yes, and I wonder whether maybe I'm completely speculating here, and I'm so sorry to everyone involved if I'm off base, but maybe it's the women's team, and maybe that's what they'll supplied. It's not. There are other teams like I can tell you like Picnic Post NL, which formerly DSM, their women's team, they do have like identical bikes to the men, but their second bike, their training bike, gets Ultegra power meters. So who knows? Maybe a similar situation to that.
Just looking on the Cerazit's website, 4i aren't listed as an official sponsor, so it could also be that they are bought in.
Yeah.
Weren't Cerazit always sponsored by Rotor? And with Rotor changing hands recently, maybe there's something going on there, or who knows. But I do know that even for the teams that have identical setups across their men's and women's squads, there isn't always as much option. I think crank length is one of the easiest spotted examples of this, in that there is a growing trend towards shorter and shorter cranks. I'm working on a story on it at the moment, and where it is like so very, very obvious on the men's side. On the women's side, it's like, yeah, I don't know if it comes down to, it just hasn't crept through into the bike fitting on the women's side, or if the riders just don't want to move to shorter cranks or what. But there's now quite often you'll find longer cranks on average on the women's side than on the men's side.
Why do you think that is? The options aren't there?
I think, again, this could be entirely wrong, similar to Dave's approach there, so apologies to anybody involved if it is. But I think if there's a rush on shorter cranks and there's only a certain number of shorter cranks available, they maybe still go to the men's team. Yeah. And then eventually when they become available, perhaps they will be an option to the women who then are mid-season and maybe don't want to change. And then you're into this vicious cycle where it happens every year.
Yeah, I think I'm also dangerously getting into the politics of cycling here. But there's a lot more funding in the men's team still. And that it may also be the fact that the men's are the ones with the budgets for the cutting edge science and to have done the testing to find out that shorter cranks are best for them. And perhaps the women won't necessarily have that opportunity for another few years until it effectively trickles down in demand. But yeah, I certainly saw that firsthand. It comes to mind, I'd say some of the SRAM sponsored teams are most progressive as far as moving crank arm lengths. Because SRAM has a long, very wide range of crank lengths to offer. But say Amanda Spratt on Little Trek, she's not a big rider and she's still on 170 cranks, which to me kind of just strikes me as that's the crank she's always used and that's the crank she continues to use. And no one has stepped in and been like, hey, there's probably some performance gains, especially after what's the condition she had, the iliac...
Iliac artery syndrome or...
Yeah.
There's a couple of different names it goes by.
Yeah, after that condition, potentially a shorter crank would actually be beneficial for her, but yeah, you just don't see that, and she's absolutely not alone in that.
It is an interesting development or lack of development.
Yeah.
Are we going to get into our worst looking bikes, or are we going to just move on?
No, I would like to, just to ensure that I get on a banned list from this company.
Okay, what's the worst looking bike then, Dave?
For me, there's no competition. They're just in their own game on this one.
I completely agree with you, Dave.
Yeah, so it's Arkea, B&B, Hotels, Bianchi, Ultra, RC. And for me, having photographed this, there is an actual face on the head tube. There are bug eyes on the head tube. Where there's the aero trip strips are placed central. They're the eyes, and then they've painted a little nose on the front of it. And I managed to get a photo or two that really accentuate it.
I can see it now.
You can see it now, and to me, I think it kind of makes me think that Kermit the Frog had relations with a cousin named Celeste and created this monstrosity.
I don't know what more to say. Every time I've managed to forget that bike exists, Dave finds a way to remind me. But I think a big part there's a lot going on here. But if it could be the fastest thing ever made, going back to that conversation about pro bike specific bikes or pro specific bikes, then there's maybe an argument for it. I don't believe this is the fastest thing ever made. But I think where a lot of the hate stems from is a very unintended pun there, is from the upward angled stem.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just not sure that should be something we direct a lot of our hate towards.
Yeah, but that stem as well, you say if it's the fastest bike out there, it would be forgivable. But everything we know about aerodynamics, that stem greatly increases the cross section to the wind. So yeah, it's just, yeah, I don't believe it's anywhere close to the fastest bike.
The question is, which is more aerodynamic, more head tube to raise the front end up further, or a positive angle stem? And I'm going to guess more head tube is more aerodynamic because it can be thinner, it can be it can be more profiled, it can be all sorts. The reason I'm saying this is that I'm trying to break the ice here for me to come in and defend the Bianchi. Because there is, if it just had a higher front end and if it had more aesthetically pleasing handlebar and stem setups, I think there could be something good looking about it. It kind of it's obviously very close to the time trial bike. It could have something going for it, but and the other big issue with it is just Bianchi, and it's such a is juxtaposition the right word from what we expect from Bianchi?
I mean they've done some truly beautiful bikes over the years, and the Special Isma still has some very nice aspects to it, like the current generation. It's just this performance aero bike is something else. Suvi, did you have one that you think is?
The Bianchi was on top of the list. Pretty much all the aero optimized bikes I feel are on top of my list of bikes that I don't like the look of. But that's just, I guess, tells something about what I like looking at. But then there's also the UAE Team ADQ.
Yeah.
Just if we talk about paint jobs.
Boring.
I don't know, again, if this is just deceiving because you pointed me wrong in kind of like it can be deceiving.
No, that one is as you see it.
I've only seen the pictures. It just looks like, like it's just nothing.
Yeah, last year they had some nice colors to their bikes. This year they don't.
Yeah, it's like stealthy. That's the kind of bike that I would look at like owning, but I'd like to see something a little bit more. But that's pretty much it. Like the X Lab as well, I put that as one of my not like. But I think this is just aesthetically the clash. I think what I have an issue with that is the branding is so large on the down tube.
They got that from Trek.
The Vision typeface on the wheels, and then the X Lab, just there's too much for me, too much clash with that.
Dave, I mean, going back to Suvi's point there about the UAE bikes, did you see any Y1RS?
No, not a single one. They're all back in Europe. My assumption is, I mean, Ronan, I think you might be better across this, but I don't think they're quite ready yet. Like they had not produced quite enough of them, maybe?
The team or the bike?
the bike, sorry. The bike.
Okay.
The Y1.
I think the team's not ready either.
Oh, okay. But the other factor there is if you're going to travel across the world, the V4 RS is the better bike to do it with rather than a fully integrated bike like the YRNS that if something went wrong, there's no chance of getting parts for it, that they'd have to travel with all the special parts for it, potentially extra tools. I think, Tour Down Under is probably not the perfect race for them to bring that bike to.
The V4 is, I mean, in modern terms, it is surprisingly, you could walk in and buy a normal stem and put it on the V4S.
Yes.
To any bike shop. But yeah, I asked that because I do think that team is not quite ready yet for a bike as advanced as the Y1RS. So I'm tracking it this season to see how that progresses.
Interesting. I did Ronan, on that topic. I did notice. I'm going to dib-dob them. UAE women's team on their 25mm width rims. Guess what tire size they're running?
I'm going to guess it's. I was going to say illegal, but it's not illegal. It's something that runs afoul of the ETRTO or the ISO.
Yes.
Standards.
Yes.
So I'm guessing.
Yeah, so 28mm is meant to be a no-no now for the UCI, but because it does sit outside of current ETRTO recommendations. But yeah, I mean it's a setup that the team had previously used successfully for quite a while. But yeah, I was surprised to still see it being used in that scenario. I don't think the UCI that are present in Australia necessarily know to check for it, and I base that on the fact that a few of us were watching some of the commissaires try to measure the lever angle on the bar, and they weren't quite sure how to do it. So it's
There's a couple of very inward-looking levers still floating about.
Yes.
Well, that is interesting.
Is it?
Is it?
You can move us on there.
Yeah. Shall we move on? We are going to move on to whether this is a leak or whether it is just a spotted, don't know. But there is a new group set floating about on the internet. Weight Weenies, the forum that keeps delivering all these pictures that are supposed to not see daylight most of the time, have revealed a SRAM Force group set. Dave, what is it showing?
I mean, this was so obviously coming. I mean, SRAM has always trickled down their top end group sets to a lower level and kept pretty much all the features. And I think it's safe to assume that the new shifter architecture that changes the position of the orientation of the the master cylinder and the piston that completely transforms how good these brakes feel. I think that is completely assumed to be carrying over. It's actually a simpler lever to do in many ways. And yeah, aesthetically, this thing, all the derailleurs and everything look just like red. I mean, you can assume it's just going to be a heavier version of red. For me, I think, we knew this was coming. Perhaps we don't know when it's coming, but it was always going to happen. That Force is going to get the trickle down. But for me, I think it did spark a bit of a conversation or some thoughts. Like, I mean, we were sharing the Weight Weenies post and kind of discussing what to do with it. And I think I have ethical issues over this. I struggle with it because part of me is like, we should alert people to when new things are coming because, maybe they've been saving up for 5 years and maybe they want to wait until the newest thing. But at the same time, there's thousands of bike shops that have Shimano Ultegra equipped bikes and SRAM Force equipped bikes in stock that are already hurting, that are already discounting these bikes. And this leak basically just ensures that they're going to lose further money on those bikes. And it's not, we're not talking about affecting a small group of people here because thousands of shops mean, times that by 2 or 3 for the number of employees it impacts. And I think it has quite wide-reaching impact when someone leaks something like this that shouldn't be leaked. And not to have too much of a monologue on this, but I think the example that I've come to in the last week of thinking about this is everyone knows iPhone releases a new iPhone every year. Basically like clockwork, 12 months, you're getting a new iPhone. But if someone released all the details of the new iPhone like a month after, say, the 16 was revealed, and they said, oh, the 17 is coming out in 11 months, and it does all of these things, it probably would screw up the sales of the 16, even though everyone knew the next one's coming. And those details might not even be worth waiting for, but I think it messes up with how the market is, and I don't know. There's two sides to this argument, but anyway.
It's using that example of iPhones, it's kind of how I would think about this. I think if the launch for a product is kind of in the next month or under that, it's kind of fair to discuss it because the product is imminently coming out. And if you just bought a bike that immediately then has out-of-date tech, you're going to feel pretty shortchanged yourself. And I think that's the same as your example with the iPhone. Come mid-August every year, no one's buying that model iPhone, and no one would question why, because it's well documented that every September Apple release a new model. And even if you do end up getting that model, you want to wait and see what the predecessor has. I think from that perspective, it's more about the time frame that these leaks or these spotteds happen to whether they are positive or negative.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And in the case of the iPhone, we have a rough timeline, like almost to the month that we know it's coming out, and there's even sites dedicated to telling you what features are rumored based on the manufacturers, like the screen it's going to, and it's never this monumental shift in technology. It's always like this iterative design. But with these leaks in the group sets, I feel like a photo just hits pause on the market entirely because people don't know what features are coming with that photo. They don't know what price point it's going to be. They know nothing about it other than that there's something new coming. And I think, it does lead to the market going stale. And from what I'm hearing, retailers are still landing bikes with current generation Force because it is the current generation.
I'll just add on that. I think it's just fair for the consumer to feel like they're in a bit of a weird position when stuff like this happens because of how much for like cycling is incredibly expensive. And if you are dropping a substantial amount of money, whatever that may be to you, on a bike that then very quickly becomes outdated, not only are you feeling shortchanged because you're not on the latest stuff, but that also affects your resale value if you're looking at replacing the bike in a year or 2 years.
Yeah, no, fair. And I can't disagree with any of that, and I fully agree with you. I guess that's where I sit in this ethical dilemma, is that I feel for the small shops that, in some cases, they're really struggling to the point that I would speculate that this could sink a few shops. Like this could be the final straw. But at the same time, I feel for the customer that, we're not talking about a small amount of money here. So, I don't know where I sit really on this, but I guess it's not as clear cut that when an accidental leak gets out like this, and there's no word of how nearby this new stuff is, that it's not so clear cut for us just to jump on it and cover it.
I think it's particularly challenging this time because it is only 2 years since Force got a facelift.
Yeah.
And
Well, by now I think you're not even 2 full years yet.
Yeah. It's around about 2 years. It's less. Yeah, you are correct, Suvi. It is less than 2 years, but it's approaching 2 years. It's practically 2 years at this point, and that's just such a short window. Now that was a facelift. It was mostly like decal changes, and they introduced a new lever shape at that time. But yeah, it's like, that's kind of where, as certain as it was that you would get trickle down from red to Force and so on. There was a tiny question mark there, like, will it happen this time or will it happen so soon? Because Force got an upgrade so recently, and I don't know what stock levels are like for that facelifted Force, but presumably there is stock of it. Presumably there are bikes sitting on shop floors with that.
I think
Force.
There's a lot of bikes still in the market with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and presumably if I was a customer now walking into a bike shop, I'd probably want to be seeing a discount on a bike that I know is going to be out of date pretty soon.
Yeah.
Realistically speaking, will it make a huge difference to the performance of a new bike I'm getting? Probably not, but quite often we only really buy new bikes because we're getting discounts on them.
Yeah. So, I mean, from my point of view on where the differences are in that new red versus the previous stuff, I would be saying if you can get a current generation SRAM Force bike, and it's significantly discounted and the price is amazing, do it, and then plan to upgrade just the shifters when the new shifters come out, because that's where the upgrade is. There's really not much else to it than that. Yeah, I mean, get that bike while it's on sale, enjoy it, try save some money. Whatever you save on the bike will be more than what those shifters are probably going to cost you, and that'll bring your bike up to date. Yeah, I don't know what else to say on that, but yeah, I did have this sort of ethical dilemma on that, where it's like it really wasn't that sort of information just shouldn't really be out in public. And yes, I could understand the argument from people saying, given it is out in public, they deserve to know. But I don't know. I struggle with that stuff.
I think we talked about this at our end of the year show, and
we did, yeah,
definitely.
Okay,
yeah,
just repeating ourselves.
No, well, it's not a bad thing to repeat. I think that was one of my least favorite things about last year. Mm-hmm. Just constantly seeing these leaks, and because there's a difference, and I think, Ronan, we talked about it, I can't remember on the record or off the record, kind of whether it is a leak and whether it's a spotted, because there is a difference to this. If we had seen this bike, this group set, for example, on a bike outside, like if Dave had spotted it for some reason, one of the women's teams would have been on this group set. It's kind of fair game.
Absolutely.
It's probably intentional. SRAM has known it's out there, but the fact that this is clearly from some sort of probably product tech sheet that is maybe shared with dealers or someone in the industry is like they pointed out, I think it's quite unethical.
Yeah, it would be from an order form for brands, placing their forecasts, basically, is where that's just come from.
Yeah.
I mean, it does raise the question, though, is like, how is SRAM supposed to build anticipation about a new group set if it's a lower tier that you're not going to see used in pro races and spotted in that way, traditional way of like, oh, look at that new thing. Which I do really enjoy that aspect of the sport, that stuff does get sort of leaked out, and we're told the pros are prototype testing it. More often than not, it's a final production version that they're using ahead of a launch, and it's actually just part of the marketing campaign now. And as much as I would like to see the pros actually genuinely be able to develop stuff that then trickle down to us and would be better, I do still like the approach that we've got at the moment. Okay,
well, I think that's all we've got to say about this SRAM Force. There's all we could talk about the tech, and everything is going to be speculation because there's no details. So this is the airtime it's going to get from us for now.
The more often these leaks happen, the more likely they are to happen, because if you're a forum user, if you're online or whatever, and then you become privy to some information like this, the temptation to share it, even you're obviously going to do it anonymously and all that, but it's like, yeah, I can see that it's the next person who maybe becomes privy to the next iteration of SRAM Rival or whatever it is, goes, oh, I'm going to put this on Weight Weenies because the last time that made all these headlines.
I think that's a point as well that you raised about the being anonymous on these forums. I think you should, before you post something or opinions in general, if you feel like you would not want it to be connected to your real name, don't post it. I think there's a line to it.
I think we could solve this problem now, Suvi. Let's delve into this.
No, we're not gonna. We're gonna move on. We're gonna get into our quick tech bites next. Industry news. We're going to start with Lapierre, who have issued a recall on the Airco DRS and Xelis SL models. There's quite a few models here listed on their website. And this is because there's some fork safety concerns around these frames. And basically, the announcement that they've made is to stop riding these bikes immediately, contact your local dealer to sort out a replacement. Interesting to this story is the fact that there's this British team, St. Piran, who back in 2022 was racing on some of these affected bikes, and they were saying that they had safety concerns around the fork. And basically, there was a lot of claims back and forth, to my understanding, about these issues. But now, Lapierre has made an official recall of quite a few bikes. And if you do own any of these bikes, probably worth checking, because I'm not going to list all the model numbers here or the model years. Head over to Lapierre's website. There's a whole banner at the top of the page, at least was last week, where you can just click and it's going to take you to the right document and tell you exactly what you need to do and what you need to check.
And if your handlebar has fallen off, then your bike is affected by this recall. Okay, moving on from that. So in the indoor cycling world, Rouvy has acquired Fulgaz from Ironman Group, who organizes a lot of events, including Ironmans, triathlons, all sorts of things. And Rouvy has also then partnered with the group to be their official training platform. So you're going to get now those of these routes of the Ironman and Ironman 70.3 triathlon series on Rouvy. So at the moment, what the purchase really means is that Rouvy will integrate 20 of Fulgaz's most popular routes into the platform, and the two are going to continue to coexist for a while. But Rouvy then announced, after they had sent the initial press release, they came back and said, well, actually, we are going to integrate them into one platform. So at some point, Fulgaz will cease to exist. That's the press release, and that was the official word from Rouvy, but there's been further reporting on that since that kind of sounds like there may be quite a bit of PR spin on that. I mean, what are we hearing? I think DC Rainmaker's reported some things here. DC Rainmaker Ray, he reported that actually when Ironman visited Fulgaz, they actually laid off all the staff of Fulgaz, including their founder, and that there was really no communication of this really beforehand, and that they were all, as he wrote, being completely blindsided about this development. Apparently, it does seem that now then, Rouvy is trying to get the Fulgaz people back on board to work. Okay. But I think that's what I understood from Ray's story, that there's been, people are being laid off by Ironman, but then Rouvy would maybe want them to continue. So. To then integrate the products. Yeah, sure. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And there's no further kind of timeline on the fact that when these two platforms would integrate into one or anything like that. So we're probably going to do a follow-up on this once things develop.
Yep. Okay. One to watch.
Yep. And on the new products front, we've got a few things to talk about. Classified has come out with some quite colourful cranks and more cassette options.
Yeah, they haven't done cranks before. So, I mean, Classified, the 2-speed integrated hub that sort of replaces your front derailleur. I mean, they had teased Ronan and I previously that they had ambitions of being a full drivetrain supplier, manufacturer in the future. And I think this is just another sign of them heading toward that, as, you know, they've now introduced cranksets with matching chainrings. Again, they didn't have that before. I think they've introduced an aero ring for the front, which looks quite cool, but has a very SRAM-like aesthetic to it. I mean, it's hard not to, and an aero ring is just a solid bit of aluminium. But the other thing is they've introduced a few different gearing ratios for the cassettes.
One of the things that is interesting at the minute with these cranks they've released is they're currently only available in one length. Yeah. So they're only available in 170 millimeters.
Perfect for everyone in the women's world tour.
Why so long? Chainrings offered will be 46, 48, 50, 52 and 54, Dave. Okay. And as Alex said, just the 170 millimeter crank length.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean the crank length limitations, hopefully they improve that soon. There's also like a bunch of new cassettes which seem to be all about compatibility with various SRAM drivetrains. Alex, do you have the details on those?
Yeah, so there is 2 12-speed cassettes that have launched. One is based around SRAM's classic Eagle and mechanical drivetrains, whereas the other one is for the T-type transmission series. Both of those are 10 to 40. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, they're offering a 13-speed T-type, which will work with SRAM's gravel Explore range, which is also 10 to 40, but adding that additional sprocket in the back. There's also a fourth cassette joining the range as well, which is another 12-speed option, but instead of it being 10 to 40, it is a 10 to 36. So a slightly tighter ratio, which the brand is angling more as kind of an all-road, more tarmac-focused cassette. And it's worth noting that all of the cassettes classified are now offering only compatible with the PowerShift CD27 hub. So if you're interested in this, you would need to make the switch to PowerShift's own setup.
Yeah. And I guess the other tiny bit of tech info on this is that when in that 10 to 40 tooth cassette option, it now increases the total range that was previously available with classified. So they're now up to 583% total range, which I think makes them the widest range gearing setup on the market as far as, use it while still using mainstream derailleurs. So anyway, that's worth looking at if you're all about the range and not about front derailleurs.
Loads of range. Alex, you also have details on new road calipers from Formula.
Yeah, so these are a new flat mount Cura. The Cura is already a brake that exists in the mountain bike space, kind of angled as a XC trail kind of 2-piston caliper, but they've now made it compatible with road bikes, adding that flat mount. And speaking to the brand, they have confirmed that internally, at least, the caliper is exactly the same as the one available for mountain bikes. So they are confident that it is at least one of the most powerful calipers that you can fit to a road bike right now.
And they're offering these at both dot and mineral seals, are they? Or is it what brakes is it compatible with?
So they are offering it compatible with Shimano and SRAM road systems. So
gotcha.
Dot and mineral.
Okay. And any word on how compatible they are as far as lever feel? I guess it's up to Formula and they're new enough that no one knows. Yeah,
I have no more information on the actual performance fit to a bike yet, but I will be interested to find out myself.
Last question from me. Is the upgrade claiming to save weight, or is it claiming to save improve power? What's the reason that someone would be interested in this?
Power. Power is definitely the angle they're taking with calipers. That they are claiming They offer the most power of any road caliper available.
Okay. All right. One to try.
I reckon if you were to fit those calipers to the new red levers, you'd probably crash immediately.
You'd stop the world from its rotational axis.
Nice. Moving on. Pashley Cycles, if people don't know, is quite an established brand in the UK. They've been around for nearly a century now, coming to 100 years of making bikes. And they have kind of taken a new direction with their bikes lately. October, they launched some kind of they launched some e-bikes and flat bar bikes, and now they've introduced some road finder drop bar bikes, which are very modern considering the kind of direction that the brand had previously, more kind of city bike, leisure riding style bikes. And there's 4 bikes in the lineup, 2 e-bikes and 2 non-e-bikes, and tire clearance up to 45mm, and prices start at just under $4,000 US, £2,800. So yeah, and I should have mentioned steel framed bikes still. And considering that they are all handmade in Stratford upon Avon in the UK, it's like not a bad deal.
Yeah, it's cool to see like these domestic steel brands kind of coming back. Like we saw Steiner, we were talking about last week in America, and I guess Pashley's kind of a British equivalent in some ways. I think it's quite nice that we're starting to see these affordable, locally made products come to the forefront. Often competing in price with the big mainstream brands.
Yeah, definitely. It is nice to see because it's just good to keep it going here for a brand like Pashley, having been around for so long. Last little tech bite is from Canadian power meter brand 4i. they've expanded their factory install program. So you could get your existing cranks installed with their power meter. This was previously only available for those who had single-sided power meters, but they have now expanded it for the dual-sided power meters and in Benelux, the UK and Germany. So previously these, if you wanted the dual-sided one, your cranks would have been shipped all the way to Canada or the US, which obviously added to the time that you're going to wait for them to go there and get back to you. So you'll be without cranks for longer. Now it's going to be a bit more streamlined.
So the Sarasit's professional team can now get their cranks upgraded.
Well, when you talked about that was my thinking, like, oh, maybe this is the reason. But who knows? Yeah, there's actually plans to, I should add, extend this program to Spain and Portugal in the near future too. So yeah, it's good to see that, because it's great that it's closer to home, less shipping cranks around the world. That's all the tech bites for this week. We are going to hand over to Dave and Brad to answer your questions.
Yeah. Before we do, though, this is directly related to Ask a Wrench, but things are changing, and Ask a Wrench is going to be moving. It's going to stay in its position. We're still going to have Brad on. We're still going to be answering some member questions each week, but it's moving to be member only. So yeah, you will need to be on our member feed of the podcast to continue listening to it from next week. This week will be the last of the fully freebies, but yeah, we'll have more information on how to sign up next week. But yeah, yet another reason to support what we do and join Escape Collective. Hey, Brad, welcome back.
Hey, Dave. Nice to be back.
You've been building up some new bikes yet?
Yeah, kind of. I've been waiting for a lot of them to arrive. I've got a lot of parts sitting around and no frames to hang them on at the moment, but they should be inbound soon. A few road bikes have been assembled to completion and sent on, so some progress, but the big load is on the way.
The actual race bikes are still to come.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm sure you're eagerly awaiting the lack of sleep to come. But
yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, as usual, we have a bunch of questions to get through. So yeah, I mean, let's just kick it off with a question from Paul out of Berlin, Germany.
I have a drivetrain question because my chain loop doesn't last very long. I use Silca Synergetic as it has been recommended by Zero Friction Cycling and many others as the best and most long-lasting lube, which is not wax. I have a Shimano 105 drivetrain, but I use a GRX crankset. Yeah, and I do it like as recommended. I put 1 drop per link. And I clean it very thoroughly after each ride and especially after lubricating it. But it only lasts like 200 to 300 Ks per lubrication, although I only ride in dry conditions and only ride a road. Yeah, and that really annoys me. And like overall, it lasts 2,500 to maybe 3,500 Ks until I have to exchange the chain. So that is really, but especially the short term, the intervals between rides, how often I have to lubricate it, that really annoys me. And no, waxing is not an option. I live in a small flat. I don't have space for a crock pot. And even honestly, the degreasing is too much. And I also tried degreasing it and non-degreasing it, and I couldn't tell a difference, to be honest. And the only thing I'm thinking of is that I may be cleaning the chain too much after lubricating it, because I use a microfiber cloth and then I clean it thoroughly until like my fingers almost stay clean after testing the chain. So maybe this is even too much and I shouldn't clean the chain so much. That would be not so nice, because then bike is not so shiny, but maybe that's the way to go. Happy to hear what advice you can offer.
I think we have some thoughts on this one, but big picture, is Paul expecting too much from an oil-based chain loop?
Yeah, I kind of had that thought too. When I read this, it's almost like kind of a managing expectations is what we're here to do for this question, Dave. the expectations align more closely with what I might expect out of an immersion wax chain. And the results he's getting are what I would expect, more or less, what I would consider reasonable for the type of lube that he is using. Yeah, 300 Ks.
186 miles.
There it is. That sounds like something I remember from the old days back when I used to try to do some conversions in my head in bike races. Basically, I think your expectations of longevity and reapplication is kind of more in line with an immersion waxing process, but realistically for the type of lube you're using, the results you're getting and the kind of relative cleanliness you're experiencing is also, I would say to be expected or certainly within the realm of what I would expect for a product like that.
Yeah. I got a few thoughts on this, which is one, like Josh Portner, owner of Silka, who creates this lube, strongly believes wax lube is best. That's a pretty strong vote of confidence for the wax. But I think, going back to this lube, a few thoughts on this. It sounds like you're running a 105 drivetrain. If you're running a 105 level chain, you might end up getting a little bit more of that like long-term durability or lifespan out of the chain if you upgrade, because there's normally lower friction, harder coatings throughout the chain. So if you go to a Ultegra level or even a GRX level chain, you may see those numbers extend by changing nothing else but that quality of chain. But I also think there is potentially a risk that you're over wiping the chain, and that if you apply just a drop of lube to the chain and then you like quite aggressively run that chain through a rag, especially if it's a microfiber rag, you'll probably find that that's taking out a lot of the lube you've just applied. So maybe don't wipe it down as much after application. Like you really just need to get that like the external coating off the chain, and that's really all you should do. And I think just a few quick whizzes through the, maybe 2 or 3 pedal cycles through a rag is probably sufficient. It might still pick up a little bit more dirt, but at least that way you're not aggressively wiping off all the lube. I'd also say maybe if you are regularly degreasing it and wiping it down and all that, then maybe there's just not enough lube penetrating into the link as well, which could help. But yeah, I think Brad's right. I think it's 200 to 300 kilometers from a single application of an oil lube is actually pretty good. So I wouldn't be stressing that too much. It just might be worth reassessing if single application longevity is critical to you, then it might be looking at worth looking at the latest generation of immersion waxes with sort of endurance based additives to them. So Silka does one, Rex does one, Absolute Black as well, it comes to mind, but there's a few options there. But I think you're not too far off of what that product is probably capable of.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's a decently long interval realistically for a lube like that. So yeah, for me, that's about what I would expect and accept the consequences. But it's sounds actually like pretty decent.
All right, well let's move on. We've got a question from George of Los Angeles.
Recently got a gravel bike, partly inspired by this show, and loving the gravel riding, loving all the extras and new things to buy and spend money on. Previously to that, very much a roadie and time trial racer. I bought a Giant Revolt Advanced Zero. It's in a medium, and I'm having a terrible time trying to get the seat post to not slip while riding. It takes about 10 minutes into the ride and it starts to slip. I have used anti-slip paste. I'm using the Park Tools paste. I've actually increased the amount of torque I'm putting into that little D-clamp seat bolt retainer. So I've gone from 7 up to 10 in a kind of fit of desperation to stop this sucker slipping. It slips like all the way down. I mean, it would just keep going until my knees are bouncing off my chin. But after 10 minutes, as I say, there's a reasonable amount of travel down and it keeps going from there. Thankfully, the day saver that you guys recommended does save the day, but it's just infuriating to keep having to, pull the seat post up while out riding. So any clues would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
All right, Brad. I think we both have some pretty good thoughts on this, but first and foremost, slipping seat post in a bike like this bike would have a D-shaped post with like a sort of wedge-shaped binder. What are you recommending as your first steps? Yeah,
and so as first steps, just to make sure I've done kind of all I can before taking it up with the dealer or something like that, would be to, first of all, remove the post in the internal wedge from the frame. It's important that there's no carbon paste or anything that is in between the contacting surfaces. They basically slide and expand as you tighten the bolt down. You want to make sure they're both cleaned, and I like to grease those surfaces so that the sliding action never really binds up, and it's, you know, like consistent as you tighten the bolt and expands like it should as you apply torque to the bolt. It doesn't stick, it kind of gets stuck in place where you get sort of a false torque on the bolt, but it's not actually expanding anymore, and then you actually don't achieve the clamping force that you should at the torque that's recommended. So first of all, that's what I would do. Pull it out, maybe clean everything well, including the inside of the seat post, seat tube as best you can, and also a little pocket in the frame where the wedge sits. I would also clean the wedge itself, apply grease under the bolt head maybe, as well as the threads and on those sliding surfaces of the wedge, so that everything's moving smoothly and there's no sticking or binding and you're getting a true torque at the rating that is recommended. I would apply carbon paste, especially like opposite the side of where the wedge is. So as it's being pushed by the wedge into the, you know, opposite facing side of the seat tube inside, you basically have that grip paste, you know, well applied in that location specifically. And maybe don't overdo it around the wedge itself, just to prevent any carbon paste from entering into that mechanism and causing binding that would somehow misrepresent the torque that you're trying to apply to that bolt. So if you've done all that and nothing really changes, I would say that you might be looking at an out of spec seat post and or seat tube. The interface is perhaps not to tolerance. And I've seen that on frames, not just giant frames like this, but other frames too, where revisions to the seat posts were required in order for the slipping to stop. So that's an option that might exist.
Yeah, like my worry is that if you're having this much post slipping and so regularly that you've potentially changed the sizing of the post by now, like you might have abraded it down, and that, you know, even if everything were perfectly set, it's kind of never going to be right at this point, and that it might need a new seat post, it might need to have that seat tube checked. And so I think there is a high likelihood, if it has been this frequent and this obvious of an issue, that it is time to take it to a dealer and really ask them to come up with a long-term solution for your bike. The other thing that may be worth an option, and I'd say probably I'd try this if for some reason they don't help you on the slipping seat post, but the newer version of this frame, I don't know which generation you're on, but the newer version does have a kind of interesting design, a design that they borrowed from their TCX cyclocross bikes, but it basically has a shim within the seat tube that takes it from a D-shaped seat post to a 27.2. I believe it's 27.2. It might be 30.9. It takes it from a D-shaped seat post to a round seat post by removing this shim, and that may be an option. You know, potentially the round seat post has a better contact surface area within the seat post, within the seat tube. You can then also get, like, for round seat posts, you can get secondary clamps, which you'd basically clamp to the seat post and have it bottom out against the frame. So it would kind of be like a secondary way to hold the post in. But yeah, I'd follow Brad's advice on this one. I'd first do the full cleaning, make sure there's no carbon paste within that binder, and then secondly, I'd probably be speaking to your dealer to see if they have a solution for you, because truthfully, your bike is worthless while it is having a seat post slipping at this rate. Like, there's no point having that bike. So I would be doing whatever you can, working with the dealer to get that sorted as soon as possible. All right, Brad. Well, lucky last question for this week. We've got Noah in Longmont, Colorado, with a geeky technical question that I think we've had to go and ask powers above for info on this one. But anyway, let's hear the question.
I have a question about Shimano GRX 12-speed braking. I have a 12-speed GRX right-side shifter and an 11-speed GRX left-side brake lever. They're attached to M6100 brake calipers because I have a post-mount frame and fork. The left-side 11-speed lever brakes well. There's very little free stroke, and it's difficult to pull the lever all the way to the bar. The right-side 12-speed brake lever has a lot of free stroke and pulls almost all the way to the bar before really engaging. They were installed by my local bike shop, who bled the right lever when they installed it, and then again to try to address this issue. I've played with the reach and free stroke adjustment on the lever, which haven't made any real changes. Did Shimano change the lever piston architecture in the 12-speed GRX brake levers so that they only work with the latest GRX flat mount calipers? Can you think of anything else that might be going on here? Thanks a lot for your help with this mystery.
This is a good question, Dave. I actually had some thoughts or some hunches on this one, but it turned out I actually learned something that I was not specifically aware of too when we asked our higher power. So why don't you tell us what we learned from our higher power and make sure I don't disclose any details I'm not supposed to say something about.
So yeah, okay. so there's a few details here. Officially from Shimano, the answer I got was 12-speed generation and 11-speed generation levers are different, and that's the newer version levers are not officially compatible with post-mount calipers that you're using, and that they also there's basically they're not really intended to be backward compatible with say like newer calipers, vice versa. So they're saying that you can expect them to feel different because they're in theory not compatible, and that they are different left to right. If you're running your left lever is 11-speed generation, your right lever is 12-speed generation. They would not tell me how they're different or why they're different, which is very Shimano. And that led me to asking other sources, secret sources, and yeah, I mean, it basically, from the sounds of it basically sounds like a lot of it comes down to that the 12-speed levers were changed based on the increased seal rollback in the caliper. So they'd given more clearance more pad clearance in the caliper to the rotor, and as a result, they changed kind of like the fluid capacity and maybe a bit of the fluid push-pull ratio in the lever as a result of that. So yeah, mixing and matching these two levers will give a different feel. Brad, you're probably familiar with this old trick, but you can, in theory, close up the gap a little bit. You can walk out the pistons a little bit to give yourself a tighter lever feel. Basically, you're effectively squeezing the brake lever without the wheel in place, which is, normally people are warned not to ever do this, but so the downside is that you're going to have a harder time getting the brake not to rub. The other downside is that it's typically a fairly temporary solution and that you need to often repeat it every few weeks or few months of riding, because eventually those pistons sort of settle back into their natural position. So there are some options here, but Brad, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think there's more to it than that? Do you think it could just be a bad bleed? What are you thinking?
So yeah, the hunches that I had before we received some other information was, and it's something I've experienced with Shimano brakes before, with other brands of brakes as well, especially when you have uneven pull or throw. It's sometimes as a result of sticking pistons in the caliper itself, and it makes it difficult to bleed it correctly. It makes it difficult to match the feel, or even if it's bled correctly on both sides, to achieve the same feel, because the pistons themselves can be slow to retract, and so you get kind of inconsistent, like a vague point of contact in the lever, because the piston's retracting slower kind of than the lever itself is, and so you get almost like a vacuum sort of almost occurs inside I guess it's basically what's happening here. It's like almost allowing like the bite point to, it's almost like if you did have the wheel out a little bit, you could almost pump the lever up a bit. You get that feeling where the contact comes with less and less throw of the lever. And so, advancing the pistons and cleaning them, it's a topic that comes up relatively regularly on our talks, Dave. It's sort of an underdone maintenance thing with disc brakes. A lot of people kind of like to forget about their brakes with disc brakes because you can for a while, but they do dry out, get sticky. Little brake dust residue can kind of inhibit the smooth motion of the pistons. And so it's important to retract them fully, bleed the system with a bleed block in with the pistons retracted appropriately. Also, if retracting your pistons, open the system so you don't kind of introduce too much pressure in a closed system. If, let's say, you've brought in some water, some moisture, if you haven't bled the system in a while, sometimes you can push the pistons back and there's some resistance there. They kind of won't stay pushed back, and that's indicative of the fact that maybe you have more fluid than you need. So push it back, open the system, probably introduce new fluid altogether if you can flush the lines. And if that doesn't fix it, then it might be a compatibility issue, and it sounds like that's a possibility in this particular situation.
Yeah. The only other thing that popped into my mind, which, I mean, it sounds like the shop bled it again, so maybe it's fine. But I mean, Brad, like Shimano road brakes are pretty stubborn, can be pretty stubborn to bleed. Like air can hide in them. Like it's...
Yeah, so I was going to say too, bleed it with the caliper off. Try to create the most vertical path. If you can kind of point the bike to the sky. Feedback Sports makes a nice product called the Flop Stop, I believe it's called. It's like a thing that mounts to your seat post and also the handlebar, and you kind of fix everything in place so you can aim the bike upwards without the bars turning. And so it's kind of a nice third hand when you're doing some funky bleeds like this. And so on these internally routed bikes where the hoses are sort of hard to straighten out once they're in there, sometimes you need to point the bike vertically and move it around, and sometimes even turn it upside down if it's possible. Not always with Shimano if you don't have syringes on both ends, but for SRAM you can sometimes do that too, which can help to move stubborn bubbles. So you have to sometimes get creative and think about, if you were a bubble, what would you be doing in there, and then kind of work backwards. So there's the recommended procedures, and then there's kind of some creativity involved to it, getting a good bleed. But if it's been a bunch of times tried and the results are the same, I'd start looking at maybe some other problem.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, along what Brad was saying, like with undoing the caliper, I think that's pretty important. And it sounds like this is, given that you're in the US and you're talking about being a right brake, I'm guessing this is the rear brake. There is quite an opportunity to have a bit of air still stuck in that caliper or that hose that's been stubborn, that even a bleed, a traditional bleed might not push out that air. So yeah, it might be worth looking at removing that caliper, and as Brad said, orienting the caliper to be a direct path for gravity to work its magic, or for the air to float up to the top. Personally, I quite like to do a little bit of it's messy, but I quite like doing a bit of a gravity bleed down at the caliper, where you're basically moving the caliper so like the air has the ability to float up out of the caliper. So you're sort of getting the bleed nipple to the highest point. That can also help in some stubborn cases. But yeah, anyway, could be a few things going on here, but assuming that bleed is perfect, then unfortunately there's still going to be a slight feel difference. My assumption would be that it shouldn't be as drastic as what you're experiencing, so there might be a few things going on here, but yeah, I would be saying maybe consider investing in a matching left-hand lever, because I also think the shape changed a little bit, so even if the feel was ideal, then at the very least they're not going to feel the same in the hand, because the lever blade's slightly different in shape, and I think maybe even the hood shape may be marginally different.
Slightly different.
So for me, I think that alone would be enough reason to upgrade the left hand to match the right. But anyway, good luck. Let us know how you go. All right, Brad. Well, that was the questions for Ask a Wrench of this week. For anyone listening wondering how they can submit a question, please head to escapecollective.com/hello. Introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, tell us what bike you're on, and ask your question. Do try to keep it brief, and just a reminder that asking questions is exclusively available to members of Escape Collective. It's our members that make everything that we do possible, so that's why they get to ask the questions. Well, Brad, always great chatting to you.
Yes, that was a fun one. I was enlightened as well by at least some of the sort of investigations that all these questions provoke. So thanks for everyone who asked them, and keep them coming, please.
Awesome. All right, Brad. I'll chat to you next week.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
That's starting to be all from us this week. But before we go, again, our site is full of pro bikes that we've been talking about and all sorts of other exciting tech content. Ronan, what would you want to highlight from this week?
I think Dave's threaded from last week.
Thank you.
Where you broke down assembling a minimalist travel size toolkit, because that's something I was teased at Tour Down Under last year, and then unfortunately you had to leave early and head home, so I didn't get to actually see what was in the travel size toolkit that Dave Rome carries with him. And now I know.
It varies, it changes, but I explain all that in the article. But thank you,
Dave and Alex. Do you have anything? Or should I just say there's loads and loads of stuff from Dave and Alex. I mean, they have basically taken over the whole site over the last week with all these bike galleries, which I would highly recommend you go check out. It's nice to see. And there's loads of small bikes. I saw in the comments actually yesterday, people were talking like, do small bikes look better or do they look worse than the big bikes? I think Yeah, I think small bikes look better. But yeah, there's loads of galleries up on the site.
Yeah, and plenty more coming. We do have, the Bikes of the Women's World Tour is already published. Bikes of the Men's World Tour is coming, which is a big lift. It's, basically all the teams and all their new bikes in one. But yeah, we've also got like random tech tidbits coming from the race starts, where sort of all the little bits and pieces that I see, many are still prototype or unofficial, or who's riding what is all in one place. And eventually I'll get to what the mechanics are up to as well, and what they've got in their toolboxes. So busy for the next week or so. So do check it out.
Dave, was it hot in Adelaide?
It's always hot in Adelaide. 37 degrees Celsius was the hottest race day so far, which is not the hottest they've had in record. It actually felt relatively cool compared to how extremely hot it gets. But yeah, you can bet all the ice vests were out at the starts.
I was just wondering if you had seen a thermobolic.
I was about to get to that, right?
I see. No thermobolic.
Oh, okay.
I was going to give that a shout out because as someone that right now doesn't actually have an indoor cycling setup, I have spent an awful lot of time riding around in sub-zero temperatures in the past couple of weeks. And that is definitely a review I'd recommend for anyone else that does venture out in January to go and give a read.
Yeah.
Yeah, if people are wondering what this is, Ronan reviewed this extremely expensive cycling onesie.
The price is thermobolics.
Yeah. from KU 36.5. Yeah, so you should go check that out. I was actually thinking about that as well, that it would be fun to try, but it only comes for men, as is quite common for these kind of top-end performance products. Maybe it will trickle down again. We'll get to it. But yeah, it was a good review. Good for those in the Northern Hemisphere. Plenty for you to read, Ronan.
I think, yeah, it was obviously a review of that, but, there's a bigger question I was posing as well. It was like, is a thermal skin suit better than the traditional approach in layering different garments? And yeah, answering that question was more difficult than I originally anticipated, but there is an answer in there.
I have thought about this because I grew up obviously in very cold conditions in Finland, and you'd always, as a kid, you'd have an overall, like just a onesie, and it was the comfiest thing ever. But then when you grow up, you stop using them because they're not cool. And I mean,
but saying I didn't look cool in those photos?
I don't know. I think it looked good, but yeah. Well, I think once you reach like the teenage years, like it was definitely not cool to rock up to school in a padded little onesie. Anyway, lots to read at escapecollective.com. Head over there. Before we go, Dave, you've got something to say as well.
I do. I just wanted to say a thank you and shout out to the crew over at Design Cycle Works in Australia's Northern Territory. Speaking of really hot, uncomfortable places to be this time of year, the entire team actually signed up to support Escape, and I think it's 10 staff. So yeah, couldn't thank them enough. Just and with that, I guess a reminder that for those working in the industry, and especially the mechanics, we do offer special industry rates for those that want to get access to everything we do and keep in touch with all that we're covering. So yeah, do head to Escape Collective, and in the FAQ, if you're in the industry or a mechanic, in the FAQ in the bottom of our site, you'll find instructions on how to get those industry rates. But yeah, thanks for all you do for the industry and for keeping everyone's bikes running.
Yeah, thanks from all of us. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll chat to you next week.